On a cold winter night in Detroit, when three brothers were killed simultaneously, nothing in the city's underworld would ever be the same again. This event, which went down in history as the Purple Gang's most ruthless revenge, was not just a gang war, but also the story of a man caught between loyalty and betrayal. Tony Giannola, trapped between his Italian heritage and his allegiance to the Purple Gang, became both a witness and an actor in this bloody night. But how could an enforcer turn his gun against people of his own heritage, and how would this decision change his life forever?
My name is Tony Giannola, and as I tell this story, I can still feel my hands trembling. In those cold winter days of 1930, as I walked through the snow-covered streets of Detroit, I remember the days when I worked as an enforcer for the Purple Gang. I lived in that small apartment on Michigan Avenue, in the heart of the city. As I watched the icy waters of the Detroit River from my window, I never thought I would experience that night. Detroit was one of the fastest-growing cities in the United States at that time. The prosperity brought by the Ford Motor Company had made the city attractive not only for workers, but also for illegal activities. While the Prohibition law was in effect, alcohol smuggling was like a gold mine. I had stepped into this world at a young age. Before joining the Purple Gang, I worked alongside my father Giuseppe in a small grocery store. Our shop on that narrow street on Gratiot Avenue in Little Italy was the meeting point for Italian families in the neighborhood. Every evening during dinner, my father would say, "Tony, do honest work, earn clean money." But the streets whispered other things. While my peers drove around in luxury cars, I was still sleeping in that damp room behind the store. My meeting with Abe Bernstein was purely coincidental. On an autumn day in 1928, he entered our store. This short, intelligent-eyed man was one of the leaders of the Purple Gang. Despite being of Jewish origin, he ran Detroit's most powerful gang. He only asked me for cigarettes, but there was something different in his eyes, as if he was evaluating me. "You're Giuseppe's son, aren't you?" he asked while lighting his cigarette. "They talk about your father in the neighborhood. They say he's an honest man." My acceptance of Abe's offer that day was the turning point of my life. Joining the Purple Gang wasn't just about making money. It meant power, respect, and fear. In Detroit's underworld, the Purple Gang's name had an effect similar to Mafia boss Al Capone's power in Chicago. My first assignment was simple, convincing indebted customers at a speakeasy on Woodward Avenue. But over time, I became involved in bigger jobs, protecting alcohol, smuggling routes, negotiating with rival gangs, and when necessary, using harsher methods. My first encounter with Vito Adamo was in the summer of 1929 at a meeting in town. This man, who was the leader of the Italian gang, was trying to establish a partnership with the Purple Gang. Vito was a confident man in his 30s, with black hair and green eyes. His two brothers, Sam and Joe, were always by his side. Sam was 3 years younger than Vito. And thoughtful in character. Joe was the youngest at 25, hasty and hot. The Adamo brothers had established a powerful gang in Detroit's Italian neighborhood, especially in alcohol smuggling. They had begun to encroach on territories controlled by the Purple Gang. This situation naturally created tension. At that meeting, while listening to Vito's speech, I realized that he was underestimating the Purple Gang. "We Italians learned this business from our ancestors," he said, blowing cigarette smoke into the air. "Newcomers like you can't compete with our experience." Abe Bernstein sat calmly across the table. While tapping the table lightly with his finger, he said, "Vito, everyone has their place in this city, but there are boundaries. If someone tries to cross these boundaries, they will have to face the consequences." The meeting ended in a tense atmosphere. As Vito and his brothers left, I can't forget the challenging look in Joe's eyes as he looked at the Purple Gang members. That look was the harbinger of disaster. Over the following months, the situation gradually worsened. The Adamo brothers began stealing customers from speakeasies, controlled by the Purple Gang. They even attacked some alcohol shipments. This situation was a direct attack on the Purple Gang's prestige. The day Abe Bernstein's patience ran out was a cold morning in November. When we gathered at our headquarters on Gratiot Avenue, the expression on his face said it all. "This ends here," he said, spreading a Detroit map on the table. "The Adamo brothers have received their final warning. Now it's time to act." When I remember that moment, something sinks into my stomach, because I was in that room too. I was also part of the plan, and I was also Italian. The plan was simple, but effective. The Adamo brothers gathered every Tuesday at their office on Jefferson Avenue. There was a barber shop on the ground floor of the building, and their headquarters on the upper floor. Security was tight, but it was the kind that could be overcome with the Purple Gang's resources. My role was to inspire trust in them because of my Italian heritage. Thanks to my previous acquaintance with the Adamo brothers, I was the only person who could enter the building. The plan was for me to go inside and open the door, while the other members would quickly intervene. That Tuesday, November 18th, 1930. When I woke up in the morning, there was a thick blanket of snow over Detroit. As I walked through the streets, the sound each of my steps made in the snow was like the beating of my heart. As I walked toward Jefferson Avenue, I felt the atmosphere of Detroit at that time in every block I passed. The city was changing rapidly with the Industrial Revolution. High chimneys, factory whistles, workers rushing to their morning shifts. But beneath this normalcy, there was the world of those like us, who engaged in illegal activities. It was as if the city had two different layers, and I lived in both. When I arrived in front of the barber shop, my heartbeat was so fast that it seemed like everyone could hear it. When I entered, I saw the barber give me a familiar smile. He was also within the Purple Gang's knowledge. "I'm going upstairs," I told the barber. He nodded in approval. As I climbed the stairs, each step brought me closer to fate. When I knocked on the door at the end of the corridor upstairs, Sam Adamo opened it. When he saw me, a sincere smile appeared on his face. "Tony, what a nice surprise. Come in, Vito will want to see you." At that moment, Sam's innocent smile began to gnaw at my conscience. This young man was just someone who followed his older brother and had big dreams. He wasn't really a bad person. When I entered the office, Vito was sitting behind his desk. Joe was by the window, looking out at the street. The room was filled with cigarette smoke, and various papers were scattered on the desk. "Tony, sit down," said Vito, extending his hand. "How are you? Give my regards to your father." With the growing sense of guilt inside me, I replied, "I'm fine, Vito, thank you. My father is also healthy. He sends his regards." Vito offered me coffee. As I drank that hot coffee, knowing that these three brothers would die in a few minutes was not a burden I could bear. But there was no turning back now. "How are things with the Purple Gang?" Joe asked, turning from the window. "Are they still having problems with us?" That question showed that it was time for the plan to come into action. I stood up and walked toward the door. "Actually, I came to discuss this topic," I said. "Abe wants to talk to you." Vito offered me coffee. As I drank that hot coffee, knowing that these three brothers would die in a few minutes was not a burden I could bear. But there was no turning back now. "How are things with the Purple Gang?" Joe asked, turning from the window. "Are they still having problems with us?" That question showed that it was time for the plan to come into action. I stood up and walked toward the door. "Actually, I came to discuss this topic," I said. "Abe wants to talk to you." When I opened the door, Purple Gang members were already climbing the external stairs. Abe Bernstein, along with 4 men behind him, silently entered the office. When I remember that moment, I feel how time slowed down. The expression on Vito's face transformed from understanding to surprise, from surprise to fear. Sam froze by the table. Joe immediately tried to reach for his gun, but it was too late. "Vito," said Abe in a cold voice, "I gave you the last chance, but you didn't listen to us. I don't want to tell all the details of what happened that night. I can only say that 3 brothers were killed simultaneously. Sam's last words were, "Give my regards to my mother." These words still echo in my ears. As we left the scene, snow was still falling. As we walked through Detroit's streets, our footprints were immediately covered, as if nothing had happened. But I knew that what I experienced that night had changed me forever. In the following days, newspapers announced this event with big headlines. Headlines like Italian Gang Massacre, Purple Gang's Ruthless Revenge, became the only thing the city talked about. Police started an investigation, but found nothing. The Purple Gang's power in Detroit surpassed even justice. For me, the real punishment was the distress I experienced in my conscience. I had betrayed people of my own heritage. When Sam's mother looked at me at the funeral, seeing the pain in her eyes was enough. That look pushed me to leave the Purple Gang. In the weeks following the incident, Detroit's Italian neighborhood had completely changed. The shops on Gratiot Avenue were not as lively as before. People whispered in the streets, constantly looking over their shoulders. The Purple Gang's power had now become indisputable, but this power was built on fear. My father Giuseppe constantly questioned me during those days. "Tony, stay away from these gang affairs," he would say every evening. "Look what happened to the Adamo family. 3 young men, suddenly in the ground." I could never tell him the truth. How could I tell him that his own son had a hand in the death of those 3 young men? I couldn't sleep at night. Sam's face constantly appeared in my dreams. That innocent smile, the words he said in his last breath, "Give my regards to my mother." These words kept me awake every night. Abe Bernstein had congratulated me after the incident. "You did a good job, Tony," he had said. "Now everyone in this city will respect the Purple Gang." But I knew I didn't deserve these praises. What I did was not loyalty, it was betrayal. In mid-December, when snow completely covered Detroit, I made my decision to leave the Purple Gang. The day I went to Abe, he was sitting in his office on Jefferson Avenue. Outside, the cold wind was battering the window. "I want to leave," I said directly. Abe looked up and stared at me for a long time. "Why, Tony? You're one of our most trusted men." "Because I can't live this life anymore," I replied. Sam's face won't leave my sight. Abe leaned against the edge of his desk. "Tony, this is how this business works. Your emotions make you weak, but I had made my decision." That night I left the Purple Gang and left Detroit. When I went to Chicago, I tried to build a new life. I opened a small restaurant there, but the past never left me alone. I saw Sam's smile in every customer's face. Every evening when I closed the door, I faced the memories of that night. Years passed. News came from Detroit. The Purple Gang's power was declining. New gangs were emerging, but the Adamo brothers' massacre was still on people's lips. That night had closed an era in Detroit's underworld and started a new period. Today, as an old man, when I think about that night, I still tremble, because that night, not only 3 brothers had died, the innocence inside me had also died, and this would never come back.
The Adamo brothers' massacre became the turning point that consolidated the Purple Gang's absolute dominance in Detroit's underworld. This event was not just a gang war, but also a reflection of the ruthless reality of the Prohibition era. Tony Giannola's story shows a man caught between loyalty and betrayal confronting his conscience. This bloody night left an indelible mark on Detroit's history and forever changed the balance of the city's underworld. Do you think Tony's choice was understandable under the conditions of that era?